Hello everyone, my name is Sebastián Prado. I am one of the trustees of the Historical Society, and on behalf of the Historical Society of Elizabeth, New Jersey, we want to welcome you to the 2022 Hispanic Heritage Month Forum discussion. Today, we're going to discuss the topic of the COVID pandemic, as we have done in the past 2 years. It's important for us to record this moment in history, that way future generations can learn from our experience. Now I'm going to introduce to you our panelists.
Hello, my name is Diana Vivanco. I was born in Ecuador. I live in Elizabeth more than 50 years. I'm a graduate from HSENJ and also a Elizabeth Historical Society trustee.
Good morning, buenos dias. My name is Doctora Tanya Pagan Raggio Ashley. My family is from Puerto Rico, Sicily, and Eritrea. I'm proud to be married to a pastor, and I'm a mother, a godmother, an auntie, and et cetera, et cetera. But professionally, I'm a physician board certified in pediatrics and preventative medicine. I'm also an epidemiologist, a person who studies diseases like COVID-19, how to prevent and treat them. And though I'm not here representing my job or anybody else, I'm a medical officer for the federal government. And I'm also on 2 governor commissions, one on reentry and one on Puerto Rico. And I'm also the chair of the COVID-19 task force on health equity for New Jersey. And if you don't mind, in addition to introducing myself, I just want to make sure everybody has the telephone number if they want to get a vaccine or a test for COVID. Eso es el número para vacunarse o una prueba de COVID. And it's 1-855-568-0545 or 1-855-56-80545. And if anybody has any questions about COVID, si tienen preguntas sobre the COVID, they can call 1-800-962-1253 or 1-800-962-1253. Thank you.
My name is Pedro Cruz. I'm born and raised in Elizabeth, a lifelong resident of Elizabeth. I'm a graduate from NJIT, that's New Jersey Institute of Technology in Newark. So my background is a mechanical engineer and I work in industry.
We're going to start by asking a general question to the entire panel. So the question is, what is the most recurring challenge you keep experiencing during the COVID-19 pandemic?
Should I start? Okay. So one is misinformation. So for example, people don't know when to wear their masks. So I'd just like to share. Sebastian, are you vaccinated against COVID? 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 Everybody in this room is vaccinated against COVID. So I can take off my mask. And that's the first thing, is that we've been given confusing information about when to wear your mask. And I would just say to you, if you go outside, even if you go to the store for food shopping, you go any place, and you don't know other people's vaccination status, just wear your mask. It's real simple. So the first thing that I come across in terms of a challenge is fear. Fear of COVID, fear of the vaccine, just fear in general. Fear because of information that they read on the internet that may or may not be true. There's a lot of misinformation, malinformación, and I would just say about those 2 things that it's very important to listen to people when they have fears and to acknowledge their fear and then to respectfully give them correct information And sometimes it can take many times. It is taking 10, 20 times for me to talk to somebody to get them to eventually get vaccinated against COVID, but it's worth every time I have to explain it. There's a lack of knowledge about the pandemic and how the disease is transmitted. The disease is transmitted through breathing, through respiratory droplets, through, our nose, when we cough. Regarding the vaccine, there's a lot of misinformation, and let me make sure I'm very clear. The vaccine against COVID is one of the safest vaccines we ever created. It absolutely minimizes or decreases severe illness and significantly decreases death and disability. And my experience with my family is a testimony to that, which I'll talk about later. It is important, no matter how many vaccines and boosters you got before, to get the new bivalent vaccine, because that will protect you against the newer version of the COVID-19 virus. It's for persons 12 years of age and older. And if you have not gotten your primary series or, never been vaccinated against COVID before, please get vaccinated. The vaccines are free. Everybody can get vaccinated from 6 months of age and older. Unfortunately, we have very, very low vaccination rates amongst our children 6 months of age to 4 years of age. It's only 35% in our children 5 to 11 years of age. But yet, when we look at our seniors, their vaccination rate is over 92%. When we look at people 18 to 64, it's 85%. And when we look at people 12 to 17, it's 61%. Why is this important? Because our seniors take care of our grandchildren, and older adults are taking care of little children, or teachers or other people are older, and if the children aren't vaccinated, many times they're asymptomatic and they'll transmit the infection to others. There are medications. There are medications to prevent COVID-19, such as EvuShield for people whose immune systems are weakened. And there are treatments. You need to get the treatment within 5 days that you test positive. And these treatments for COVID are called Paxlovid. It's an antiviral, or monoclonal antibodies. I think the other issue, the other challenge is lack of access to testing. And initially, vaccines were difficult to access. And I want to say to everybody, you can get free vaccines at the Department of Health. You can get free vaccines at federally qualified health centers. Just look up HRSA, findahealthcenter.com. We have over 135 sites in New Jersey. Yes, testing is not free every place, but if you need to get tested, please call the number I gave you earlier for the health department, 1-855-568-0545. If you need a vaccine, call that number. And if you have any questions, call the number 1-800-962-1253. And I think that will help to minimize those challenges.
It's great that you share all of this important information with us and with the people watching the panelist discussion. Pedro or Diana, have you had any challenge and how you overcome it?
I would say that with all the information that Tanya gave us, there's a lot of, for me the challenge is the adaptation, to adapt to every evolving changes, a lot of information, a lot of things going on at the same time. And that's a challenge, to be able to adapt to these changes quickly and then be able to respond, be open to this change. I think this generation has to learn. We are learning, still learning. That's the current challenge, to adapt quickly and then respond quickly too.
Yeah, I guess what I would add to that response is, I mean, what I do, I don't really deal with the public, but like, just seeing like, I guess from an outsider's perspective and being somebody in society, as we all are, it's just frustrating to see, what that affects, with the misinformation and all that stuff. Like, I'm a ardent believer that this thing could, or at least we had the tools to at least not make this into the big thing that it was. And, that's kind of the takeaway that I see, especially in light of all the perspective that Tanya said, especially with like, we have the tools, we have the technology. Like this whole thing probably could have been compressed and probably would have not expanded into the pandemic that it is. And I think now we have to look into the consequences long term. Not only endemic and maybe just endemic in the sense that it's local to maybe our parts of the world, where it may not be such a big deal in places like Japan or South Korea, for example.
This is another question for everyone to answer. You've mentioned in your previous answer that misinformation and also a lot of information was a struggle for you. How do you find a way to filter information? How do you find reliable sources, and how was that process?
Okay. So first of all, there's very reliable information at the national level. The Centers for Disease Control, also known as the CDC or CDC. If you go online and go to cdc.com and just look up COVID, and you can do that on your phone. You can do it on your smartphone. You can do it on the computer. There's lots of excellent information there. At the New Jersey COVID Hub, there's a lot of good information there. I have a dear friend who's a nurse. Nurses provide excellent information, very simple to understand. They listen. And I add the listening because many times when people are fearful, when people are taking misinformation, in order to help them to change, to be able to accept correct information that they may be hearing from nurses or doctors or other people, or discerning what they're looking at online or hearing on television, you need to understand what it is that they're afraid of. Why is it that they're integrating this misinformation? And once you hear that, then you can have a dialogue. And I'm not ashamed to tell you, sometimes I've had to talk to people 10, 20 times before they decide to get vaccinated. And my colleague here, Pedro, said he doesn't provide care, but he's an engineer. We just sat outside and talked. He speaks so clearly. Many pastors, many people who are not clinical people, but just take the time to understand and read and are great communicators and trusted by the community. Those are the ways that we correct misinformation and address fear.
Now we're going to move into a specific question for each panelist. I'm going to start with Pedro. We know that the pandemic presented new challenges and opportunities for your work. What new insights were gained from that experience?
So I think, so we're 22 now, right? So it's been roughly 2 going on 3 years with this situation, and it's presented a lot of challenges, but in those challenges there's a lot of opportunities. And this is spread around. Like, I work more in an office environment, but clearly a lot of these companies were able to make changes, and it's just about adaptation and being flexible, if anything. So like what I've seen in the last 2 years, especially depending on what organization you work for, the ones that are the most nimble, most, I guess, experimented have thrived. Even from the smallest ones, mom and pop stores, this whole implementation of, contactless, way of doing business has been very fruitful. And a lot of the stuff that has been grand changes into society that, again, going back to, opportunities in the challenges is opportunities. So especially the things that are happening right now with the labor market, there's a lot of people that I've seen, this situation has produced a lot of, or has exposed the fractures that are inherent in, the whole global supply chain system. So people now are understanding, hey, there's value in what I do. People are asking for equitable outcomes in the labor that they provide. So to go back to your question, it's always about, recognizing the challenges, recognizing that within those challenges, there's opportunities to improve, opportunities to learn new skills. I mean, one thing that I can think of right off the top of my head, a lot of people have been able to transition into new roles, whether it's I guess the trucking crisis is a good example. People that have never considered that as a career path now are making, or at least are having the ability to access a high-paying job that may not be, it's not, not to demean it, but there is skilled labor in that, and a lot of these people, take the example Amazon, or I think it was Walmart, if I remember correctly, they were offering starting positions for $100K and willing to train folks for a needed skill. In this economy, even if we went transition to the online and buying things from home, you still need to get it from point A to point B. So that was, again, a lot of people made the move because economically it made sense to them. I guess from a health perspective, you're inside the truck cabin, so you're away from that, crowded atmosphere. So a lot of booming things there. This whole thing, Zoom, it's a commonplace thing now. So, not everybody participates in that, but again, it just shows you with adaptation, there's risks, of course, but there's potential outcomes, good outcomes for, whether it's individually and societally speaking, to increase the level of what have social good, economic good, whatever it may be, whatever the metric may be.
You mentioned that there's been a lot of changes in the workplace. What advice can you give to the Hispanic community concerning protocols and their importance?
So, when you mention protocols, I specifically think about this whole thing. How do we deal with the challenges that just specifically to the disease, right? So, the protocols are very simple. Some people may not have, they're against the higher powers, the powers that be. But just listen to the experts. If you would have just, again, I'm an ardent believer. If we execute correctly, we would have been in a much better situation. Again, I give the example of places like Australia, New Zealand. They took the measures in good faith and look at the outcomes. Yeah, sure, they had to close down and things like that. Travel was restricted. But at the end of the day, their level of incidence, their level, on a percentage basis, they've had better outcomes. It's sad as me to say this, but we're a First Nation world, and by many metrics, we're the first, especially in an economic point of view. The United States has a lot of leverage, but on the front of combating diseases, respiratory illness, such as this, we failed on many metrics, and it goes to show. We wasted a lot of money, we lost a lot of people, hospitalized a lot of people, and just looking at the economics metrics themselves, we've lost some things, but we've made some gains as well. But just I guess the demographic basis, I guess the risk there we didn't listen to the protocols, we suffered consequences. So to answer the question, I guess more fully, like at the end of the day, it's all about managing your risk. Take the information you have, absorb it. It's fine to question some things, but as long as they come from a good place and it's just not like, I guess, some sort of agenda of sorts. And again, make your own decisions, but these protocols, they're there for a reason. It's not to tamp down. It's, again, the protocol is there to adapt to the evolving situation. So.
Tanya, in the recent months, we have heard a new word that is endemic. Can you explain the difference between pandemic and endemic?
No problem. Thank you so much for that question, Sebastian. I'm an epidemiologist, so I embrace answering that. If you don't mind, I'd like to read the definition. So what is an epidemic? I'm going to say first, what's an epidemic? So an epidemic is an unexpected increase in the number of cases or causes in a specific geographic area. So you see a little blip, a little increase in a disease, that's an epidemic, okay? What is a pandemic? The World Health Organization declares a pandemic when a disease's growth is exponential. In other words, the growth skyrockets, it increases out of control, and each day the cases grow more than the day prior. And so we declare a pandemic. Now, what is endemic? Endemic is a disease outbreak which is there, it's there all the time, but it's limited to a particular region. The amount of disease that you see is predictable. And so given those definitions, Sebastian, I would say we're still in a pandemic, but we're acting like it's endemic. And you can see that in the fact that how the CDC now uses, you'll see on TV or you'll read, okay, this area is having a high rate, a low rate, a medium rate of COVID. That fluctuates every day. Even if in our own little area, within a week, we can go from high to low to medium. So I hope that answers that question.
Do you think there's a difference between the general community and the Hispanic community, between the two terms?
A difference between the general community and the
Hispanic community
in terms of
the pandemic and the endemic?
I think there's a tremendous difference. And again, because we are such a diverse people in New Jersey, and because, for example, just like Puerto Rican, I'm Puerto Rican, but we are from all over South America, Central America, Mexico, España. We're from all over. Y además de eso, in addition to that, we also are part African. If we think about us, Latinos, Hispanics, in terms of globally, we are at higher risk. For example, as Latinos, if we look worldwide, every day, there's almost 500,000 cases of COVID. Those cases are in all those different places, not just here, right? Then as Latinos, first of all, sometimes we're not treated the way we should be. We're discriminated against. Sometimes because we come from all these different places, sometimes we are documented, or sometimes, tenemos papeles, and sometimes we are undocumented, no tiene papeles. And many times people who are undocumented, whether they're Latino, whether they're from wherever they're from, they're afraid to go for care. In addition to that, if you look at us in terms of risk, riesgo, in terms of our immunity, la inmunidad, Number one, we have a group of individuals, particularly when you look at Puerto Ricanos and other Latinos who've been here for a long time, Mexicanos. We have a group of the very old, lo viejiciento, and as you get older, you're in unity weekends, okay? Then, of course, we have problems with obesidad. We like to eat, right? And if you look and you listen to the CDC, obesidad places you, obesity places you at risk, no matter if you're Puerto Rican or Latino or you're African American, but we tend to be at a greater risk. As Latinos, we have a higher risk of asthma. The men tend to smoke more than the women, right? And so with that, you also see other respiratory diseases. And as I was talking to my colleague Pedro about, different works and exposure, for example, to the refineries and other things, that also increases your risk of asthma or other respiratory illnesses. We have one of the highest rates of diabetes in the world because we are also in the indigenous people of the Americas. And we know that people who are indigenous have higher rates of COVID, but people don't think in America of Latinos as being indigenous. I don't know how they can, but that's it. We have higher rates of HIV and other chronic diseases. All of those things, when you look at the CDC criteria for risk of COVID-19, risk of death, risk of serious illness, contribute to why we as Latinos have a higher risk.
Thank you for your information. What you shared. Now I'm going to move to Diana. As a community that was recovering from the pandemic, Elizabeth was also impacted by a historical flood in 2021. It was caused by remnants of the Hurricane Ida. How was your personal experience as a member of the community affected by it?
I would say that, you mentioned 2020, like last year, like everybody was like trying to get a grip of recovering from the pandemic, and as a community, we're trying to back to normal, right? And I would say that as similar to the pandemic and similar with the natural disaster as it was a flood, we were not prepared. To these situations. And then what my family and I were experiment was like we are susceptible to damage or everything changed in a small moment. So that was a experience that we learned to be prepared, and then everything changed in a matter of minutes. So Elizabeth was very impacted by the flooding. A lot of people lost their homes. There was a lot of damage, and what we learned is that the community is important for recovery for everybody. Like we used to think that when something happened, we just called the fire department, we called the 911. But what we learned and we realized that is a lot of people at the same time are in emergency situations, and a lot of people in our situations that everybody's calling 911, so the fire department couldn't be at the same time in the same place. So what happened is that we had to rely on the neighbors on help each other. So I start rebuilding at the next day after everything happened. So that was very impactful for Elizabeth, and it was historical.
You mentioned that the community was important in the recovery process. Do you have any message for the people watching regarding helping each other or being prepared in case any emergency happens?
Well, one thing I would say, what we learned is important to know your neighbors. We, as urban community, we just dedicate each other to just go to work and attend or necessarily the needs of our family, but we neglect a little bit of the sense of community and learn who is your neighbor and, be a more helpful community. We be there for each other. So I learned in that kind of situation that your neighbor is the most important person. That's the person that you need help from, and they also, you are the most important person for the people. So you need. We didn't have electricity. We didn't, there are many things that only your neighbors can help you with. So it's like also it's important to know it's elders live close to you, so everybody have in the back of their mind when these things happen, so you can be helpful to others and others can help you too. And the other thing was to be prepared. We as a Latino community don't have educational, cultural, or economic education or preparedness education. We learn to solve the problems as we in the march. So one thing is the structure here in how the system works, and coming from our countries to this country, is that we always have to be prepared because I'm talking about economic planning, insurance, all the things that we have to learn as migrants, and we need to adapt to this system, and it's very important to learn that we need to be prepared and that we need to have everything in order. I think it's part of the assimilation process into the culture of being able to recover after these kind of situations, to have to be prepared.
So thank you everyone for sharing your perspective on the pandemic. Now we're going to do some general closing questions. So the first question is, as we continue to live with the COVID pandemic, what is the importance of having a growing Hispanic representation in each of your fields?
I would say having humans, we live with react to empathy, and it's very important having people like Tanya, Pedro, leaders, Hispanic leaders in the workforce to represent this empathy from the Latino point of view. I think it's important that this leadership understands our needs, what the community needs. Also, all the question, all the experience is from the Latino point of view is kind of different from other communities, even though we are equal, but we also have different starting points. So I think it's important for them.
I would add to that. I mean, I think if I remember correctly, the statistics are now that it's 23% of the population in the United States, and that number is only expected to grow more. So we need to have, I think it's important not only, to develop, to have the community involved, educated, but more importantly, it's that involvement, whether that means politically or whatever it may be, but just having, it's representation is good, but it's also having that voice and not being afraid. And I know it could be a difficult place, but just having that point of view reflected across and communicated effectively. And I think, with time, these things are going to get, it should be incumbent on us as a community to be, number one, be critical thinkers. Number two, develop plans or whatever it may be. And number three, execute. So again, if you do those three things together, that growing 22 percentage points or whatever it may be, that's going to be something that the country at large can't ignore. And if things are done correctly or done with enough effectiveness, what you're going to have is you should have positive outcomes, right? Hopefully we'll live, many decades or whatever it may take, what have you, a situation where like these problems that we're discussing today, their incidence is a lot less. So, again, like numbers are good, but we need to communicate and we need to be, realize, hey, we're here. We want to contribute. We want to add value, and we want to do things right for our community, but also the entire American community at large.
So I loved your answer, both of your answers, and I'm going to follow up on what both of you said. So given that we make up over 20% of the population in the United States as well as in New Jersey, only 4% of us are physicians. I wish my colleagues who are nurses were with me right now because we have it a little bit more Latinos, Latinx, Latinas who are in the nursing profession, but we need more. We really are underrepresented in terms of the researchers that we need for the virus, which changes all the time, and for the treatments. And we need other health professionals, such as engineers, right? And this all goes to, even though you don't always have to have racial and ethnic concordance, meaning that even though someone doesn't have to be African-American, Latino, I don't like to use the word white, but also I'll just say only because whites, include a lot of different ethnicities, but white, whatever. When someone looks like you, when someone speaks the same language, right? When someone understands the cultural subtleties, it is critical, particularly in medicine and in the emergency room, where you have to make split-second decisions. So, por ejemplo, we're storytellers, right? And I'll give you my story that really pulls this together. My mommy got double vaccinated for COVID, against COVID. She got boosted, and last week, la semana pasada, ella tuvo con COVID. She developed COVID. Actually, it was the week before. And it was funny because she had these symptoms, and she said, Mija, my daughter, do you think I have COVID? Do you think I have the COVID? And so when she said the COVID, see, everybody laughed. Everybody knows when she said the COVID, that's an emphasis, meaning, this is something bien serio, this is something serious. And I said, maybe, mamita, let's test you. So we tested her. Of course, she came out positive. But she and I had hope. We had esperanza. And we didn't have that in the principio, in the beginning of the pandemic, because within the first month of the pandemic, several members of my family were sick. And when mommy got sick and we took her in the hospital and we made us wait outside in the car for hours, I kept praying to God. I kept praying and saying, bargaining, saying, please save my mommy. And I thank God for the doctor because he says, you take your mommy home. I've given her all this medicine, but we have almost 100% mortality rate when we admit someone your mommy's age. At that time, she was in her late 80s. Now she's 91. But this time, when I took her to the hospital, her symptoms weren't as severe. Thank goodness she had good insurance, and that's an issue para nosotros, right? That some of us don't have insurance. They called the hospital ahead of time. They had, or my mommy calls them monoclonal antibodies ready for her. And she had a nurse And even though he was not of the same culture, he understood the culture of the aged. Because they had made me wait outside, and he called. He's like, no, come in, be with your mommy. Because he understood that Mamita is 91, that Mamita, yes, she speaks English, but he could tell, that maybe there were some things he was missing. And I want to end my answer by saying something that my mother always says: no hay mal que por bien no venga. There's nothing bad, that good doesn't come of it. And again, it goes to our culture to say that yes, she had the COVID, but she also understood, she had the hope, she had the esperanza that, but now I've been vaccinated against it, and now there's a medicine for it. So now I have hope. And anybody who doesn't understand that communicating that back and forth helps people to get better, it's probably one of the most important things in medicine, in addition to the treatment, that people have that inner hope. And that being able to communicate, being able to understand each other, is why we need more Latinos, Latinas, Latinx in the fields of health, research, medicine, and all the other fields that we're talking about.
The next question would be the last one. I'm going to close with that one. And I think it's an important question because it's an example of what we're doing today, giving to the community. So why do you think it's important for us to contribute to the community, and in specific the Hispanic community?
Again, I think it goes well. Before I start, just want to give an asterisk because I wasn't totally sure about that 20% figure, but I know it's a figure that's for sure that's going to expand, and it's something that's been noted in many, I guess, studies and political outlooks and whatnot of that nature. So the 20% figure is wrong. I'll happily revisit that data point, but the fact still stands. But to your question, I think it's important, and at the end of the day, it comes back to the concept of this participation. Like, we need to participate, and we need to have, again, going back to that anchor point of a voice. Long term, if you don't speak about these issues, there's not going to be, I wouldn't say an impetus, but you won't have at least a clear plan of attack to address these problems. So we need to, at the end of the day, the more we talk about things, the more we discuss, pros and cons, it encourages, debate, discussion, and it leads us down a path to a solution, and that's what it comes down to. So things like this, help to, number one, awareness. Number two, if you're listening, preps your mind to explore the possibilities. And number three, hopefully with the idea, put a plan in action and again execute. It's one thing to talk, but once you start executing on things, you're going to see some sort of effect. Whether that effect is positive or negative, that's how we make progress. So with that in mind, it's these things are important on that basis alone.
I would say that also to look out for each other. There are no systems in place. There are no education systems, health systems designed to help the citizens, the community as a whole. It's designed to have everything working in place, but they're big systems, and we cannot depend on this government and then in these government systems to just hope and wait for them to work for everybody. we learned that there are more communities that need more participation, like our community, Hispanic community, that needs more involvement. And then sometimes the system doesn't help directly to the community, so we need a little help between each other. For example, communication, a lot of people don't the language, a lot of people is a lot of barriers to get the help, sometimes the resources that our community needs. So I think we can start small in our environments. Sometimes in the same family, we learn that we need each other in the community, in the church. So there's a lot to do. It's only that we need to help each other. Like we cannot wait for the government to help the community. They help everybody. It's like the government is a big system that we are part of that, and then we also have to take part of in the leadership and helping each other.
I think my colleagues really addressed the answers. My answer will be short. I've already told you about my personal experience with my family, but that experience can be repeated with my friends, with the people in my neighborhood. And I can tell you, as a Puerto Rican, the lens through which I see not only COVID, but things like the hurricanes and the floods that you talked about, I see it differently because I think first, of course, I think as a Puerto Riqueña, and so all the time I'm thinking of the rates of COVID here, and that even though in Puerto Rico the vaccination rates are high, very high, that the rates of COVID are still high, and I appreciate that as a Puerto Riqueña because I also understand that in Puerto Rico they're very dependent on travel and whatnot, tourism, right? And then when I think of other Latinos, my thinking is similar. I think about the different situations. Then I think, for example, when my mommy came from Puerto Rico, she came to the barrio. And in the barrio, in East Harlem and in other similar places, right? Many people are very crowded in apartments, and so that puts them at an increased risk. People don't think about that, but that's how it is. And then if you start talking about people who are new immigrants, who maybe are undocumented or don't have papeles, and I think about, for example, particularly the men, but sometimes women and children, they may be actually sharing, they may be paying to sleep for several hours in an apartment, right? And so when you think of, to me, when I put together my medical hat with my Puerto Rican hat and my Latina hat, I see all those risks and how can we do things to prevent? How can we do things so that people who may be, even though the majority of us are documented, for those who are not, for those who are uninsured, how can I make them feel safe to come, to be tested, to get treatment? And then of course, my colleague talked about language and the church. And I can't emphasize enough how much important language is. And I have this pretty little thing I'm dying to show that says thank you in many different languages. Okay? All right? There's nothing like hearing your own language. There's nothing like understanding in your own language. But the other thing is that all the things we talked about earlier, it's through our lens, okay? My husband happens to be a pastor, and people who aren't Latino or Latina, Latinx, they may not appreciate the important role of the church. Many times that's where many of us got tested, got vaccinated, where the misinformation was corrected, because even though the pastor may be, he or she may not be a health professional, they respect him or her. They believe him or her. Many, adentro, within many of the churches, there are nurses or other people who work in the medical, profession, and so they can deal with the misinformation. So I said I was going to be short, and I wasn't. But those are all the reasons why I just think it's so important to be present, to present it, because without our voice, then the lens isn't seen through which our people may be suffering. And as both of my colleagues have said so eloquently, they don't have to suffer. They're suffering needlessly. And this is best how they can be reached.
Thank you, everyone, for your answers, for your knowledge. I'm just going to close with saying that I hope that you learned something from this panel, that as they have mentioned, read your sources, get your information from the right places, help your community, and by doing that, you will help yourself. And yeah, I think that's all. I don't know if any of you want to do any extra comment, any final comment.
I would just add, you talked about, citing the correct information or looking up the information, but it's qualifying information, right? Does it come, from a trusted source or a vetted source? Is it grounded in reality? And then you can make, again, once you vet that information and once you qualify it, you can start making your assessments. And, just reflecting on a lot of the stuff that was discussed here and, personal experiences, I think we should take the last 2 years, and especially all the calamity that's going on this year, it's learn from the mistakes, learn from our mistakes. If you don't, clearly, if your perspective is that, government isn't good enough or whatever, okay, well then make a plan to rely on yourself and be prepared for whatever, I'm not saying that disasters are going to come by, but if, rough times come around, be prepared for that. And I think, everything that we've gone through as a community individually has shown us that there is fruits in being prepared and not having to scramble around when something happens. It's certainly something that I approach it because, it's everything's risk, and life is risk, and at the end of the day, it's how you manage those risks. And sometimes in those risks, I think I mentioned before, there's a lot of opportunities for improvement, charting a new path. So I think it's important, hopefully that if that's one takeaway, we can all learn from this to improve. And hopefully, in the future when these types of activities occur, again, we can reflect and say, hey, we made some significant change, or at least a step in the right direction.
And I just want to make the following recommendations. And if you can think about it in terms of prevent COVID, what to do when exposed, and how to treat or pet, this is what I want to say. We're getting a mixed message about wearing masks. Just wear your mask. I'm so sorry. Just wear your masks when you're not around people, when you don't know people's vaccine status. For example, I knew today that all of my colleagues are vaccinated. I took off my mask just to demonstrate, how you can go about doing this. But many times we can't ask people, right? So just assume there might, if you go shopping or you go wherever, someone might be infected, okay? Second is, vaccinate. Vacunarse. And vaccinate not only against COVID, making sure you get what's called the primary series, either 2 vaccines through Moderna or Pfizer, or 1 through Janssen, as well as the boosters. But make sure if you're eligible for the new booster, and that's for 12 years or older, the bivalent booster, that you get it, okay? And don't worry about the cost for the booster, because it's free. The vaccines are still free. If you're exposed, the E-PET, if you are exposed to somebody who has COVID, or you have symptoms and think you might have COVID, get tested. Unfortunately, the government had spent a lot of money on COVID-19, and we had a lot of money for the uninsured, and we don't have as much. But please get tested. Departments of Health still test for free. New Jersey Department of Health and local departments of health. Once you get tested, within 5 days, you need to get treated. The other thing is if you're at high risk, if you are immunosuppressed for any reason, like I said earlier, there is a medicine called EvuShield. EvuShield. Many people, for some reason, in the Latino and the African American community don't know about that, but that's there. And then within 5 days of testing positive, please, if you're in any of the risk categories I talked about before, and even if you're not sure, just call. If you go to New Jersey Department of NJ COVIDHub.com on the internet, or call, you can find out, okay? You go to the CDC website, you can find out. But the bottom line, just ask somebody, and Paxlovid, which is the antiviral medication, is free. If you're severely immunosuppressed and at very high risk, you might need monoclonal antibodies. And the only thing I would say about that is, if you're insured, it's easier to get. If you're uninsured, it's difficult. But if you're very sick, go to the emergency room and get treated. That's it.
I would say that as Pedro said, we prepare for everything. The only thing everybody and any age we learned in the pandemic is that everything could change in 1 minute. And then we learn to value what we have. And then if you're a student, you're preparing not only for have a degree, but also to be able to adapt to everything changing. The jobs that we have today, maybe they're not going to be in the next 10 years. They're going to be different, and they're going to be adapted to what the current situation is. So is be open to adapt, and also be open to be prepared for everything. And we don't like to think about the future or that don't be disability, but it could happen. So we should be able to plan ahead and be ready to respond to that.
So thank you everyone for your closing comments, and thank you for watching this presentation. Just a reminder, we're celebrating the Hispanic Heritage Month. Please, thank you for watching, and we hope to see you next year.